Hai, kinaskuntan. Kitatamskatin wow, kagayo seo nēhiyaw isigasun, pagkitawagan sa gaganik, uchinia, ukiskin wahama geonia, nitato skawawak, nēhiyawak language experience, egwa the University of Victoria. Nēhiyawan, pipikskewin, nanto kakyo ni pamatsawin. Namoya kwayas pipikskewin nehewin, maga ikutsi tayan, tapto gisagaw nehewin. Iwitziwak nitotemak egwa ni wako maganak egwa piakowehon niti nehiyawak language experience. Ukiskin wahama geonia egwa ukawimau nia egwa ukumau nia. I am from Sturgeon Lake First Nation, Saskatchewan. I'm a second language adult speaker. I get a lot of help from my family here at Cree Camp and along with my friends. And I make circles to practice speaking. I really enjoyed listening to the youth panel this morning. I felt those exact sentiments when I started learning how to speak, and that was about 18 years ago. And so I said that I'm a lifelong learner of nēhiyawak, of Cree. So with the nēhiyawak language experience, I had to create a context that was safe for me. When I was listening to Levi speak, that's like when people would come up to me when I first started learning how to speak Cree, I had a lot of criticism and lots of people were correcting me and telling me I said it wrong or I did something wrong. And that's not helpful. It's actually very traumatizing. It can make someone just give up. And so this is one of the reasons why I created this Cree immersion camp 18 years ago. I was teaching high school, and in my third year, I felt something wasn't right in my gut, and instinctually, I wanted change, not just for myself, but for the students that I was teaching. And so I started a master's program. And how I got into that was, again, just hanging out with other Cree-speaking people. I was naturally drawn to the language. Before I was a teacher, I was a young administrative assistant working at Oskayak High School. It used to be called Jodaket High School, and then before that it was called the Native Survival School. And so this is when I really began in earnest to pay attention to nēhiyawak. In my third year of teaching, I started looking at other places where I could learn how to speak Cree naturally, because I have been learning how to speak Cree through a book. And just like Cameron said, I got that same kind of criticism that I sounded like a nēhiyaw trying to speak Cree or speaking Cree. I needed something natural to help me progress. I started taking classes at SILR, just like what Kevin Lewis was referring to. I met a lot of people being a student at SILR, the Canadian Indigenous Language Development Institute. And then I got to instruct there before working at the University of Victoria, Indigenous Language Revitalization field. This program was imagined and dreamed of in 2003. It's with the help of my family and my community in Sturgeon Lake. My mom was the Daniels and my dad's an Ermine. So a lot of my Ermine relatives helped me prepare for this. This is not like work that I do by myself. I'll call my dad and my uncles up and I'll tell them to get the place ready, that we're gonna have some visitors come to my home community of Sturgeon Lake. And I've also learned along the way in my nēhiyaw learning journey that ceremony is also important. When I was learning how to speak Cree, I felt like I hit a plateau or I couldn't progress. And it was actually my Uncle Willie who said that, Belinda, what are you giving up? What are you sacrificing in order to get what it is that you want? That made me think deeply. And so what was I sacrificing to allow the language spirit to come into my heart. And so ceremony was super important. I also was working full time, and I went down to 50% to focus on my language with the help of this language camp. So my family helps me with this, and I wanted to point that out, that it's not a one-person show. It takes community and family and people who love their language to help. I just want to give a shout out to Nimis, Dorothy Thunder. She's one of the continuing teachers that come out to Cree Camp every year. I work with about a dozen teachers. Everybody specializes in a language methodology. The teachers that come out are master teachers who've gained a lot of experience, did some education in language theory. So this is super important when doing our camps. So as I got to get deeper into my language learning journey, I'm also a natural curious person. I've always had a curiosity about life and about all kinds of things. I remember my Nukumban always reminding me of my characteristic, and this is where Gagayo comes from. My Cree name, it's not a spiritual or a sacred name, it's kind of like just a nickname that my community gave to me. Gagayo means she or he who is industrious and creative. And so with that, my Nukumban, this one time she said, Belinda, itinisit. She goes, you ask questions that no one ever asks. And she goes, this is how we know that you're wise. She said that to me in my early learning when I first started reclaiming nēhiyawak. And so research is a part of that curiosity. I love research. We don't have enough second language adult acquisitioning research. My team, we look at that now. We look at how do adults learn, what's the best way to learn. We also look at like trauma-informed practices because that's often a barrier or a challenge we as Indigenous peoples feel when reclaiming language. And sometimes we don't even know where it comes from. When I first started, I would get really emotional when I started speaking Cree, and I would start crying, and then I would have this scratch in my throat and this huge tickle. I learned to embrace that because it was historical trauma that I was carrying in my language, in my voice. And so I had to face it, cry it all out, and move forward in that pain so that this pain that I felt in my throat could turn into a scar. And so that's what it is now. It's a scar that I carry, but I can move forward now in speaking Pipikskwen Uma nēhiyawak. Here's one of our earlier presentations, just before the pandemic hit. I did some research with my nēhiyawak language team, and we're asking questions like, how does land inform our language learning? How do we as a group of people learn from the land? And so this picture is like the second camp that I held. I made some really good friends doing these language camps. And in this picture I have my cousin, Dr. Karen Drain, Recollect, and I also have my good sister, Dr. Lana Whiskey Jack, who came. And so we're still really good friends now. And then I have my little sister there, Tammy Ratt, who's now in PhD studies. There's like this growing family of people who pursued Western education formally or informally and are now doctors because of our Indigenous methodologies and our ways of knowing and being. And so with Language Camp, we show the language by doing the language. I'm now doing current studies on how to step away from English. We know English is a dominant bully language in immersion settings, and so this is new research that I'm now looking at. So this is my home community, Bagitwagan Sagagan, and this is where we host the camps to this day. Sometimes we have gone to other places where we're invited, but for the most part they take place in Sturgeon Lake. And so these language camps are a 1 week immersion. And I'm very adamant about speaking nēhiyawak. I'm very strict about that. You know how when you go to a powwow, you have like a stick person? Well, that's me when it comes to just speaking in the language and staying in the language. Because I'm very serious about that. And so we'll have a camp setup day, and then we have a camp takedown day. There's all kinds of like things that go on. My research picked up on this. There are some spiritual aspects that are happening. If we can listen to Peter Turner, I want you to take a listen to what he has to say. He's one of the research participants who's been coming to Cree Camp for about 4 years.
With all the styles of teaching there listed, it's not just those as instructional moments, it's the entwined experience of the day where all those learnings mingle in your mind and mingle in your lived time there, that they form deeper and layered understandings and learnings. So you're not just learning words, you're actually engaging with people and repeating the experience or coming back to it later in the day or the next day. That makes it a permanent encounter, and learning happens that way.
And so what he's referring to is that we have what we call language stations. There's anywhere from 4 to 6 language stations. There's a teacher per station, and the participants, the learners, are grouped to the level of speaking that they comprehend. So we do assessment too. We just started doing assessment for learners who are coming. And I want to point out that this is not a beginner's camp. These guys have been learning how to speak Cree. They've taken Cree classes. They participated in the nēhiyawak language map experience. They've come to Cree camp prior. And so people who are coming have somewhere anywhere between, 50 to 100 hours of Cree language already. This is a model of 4 stations, but it's now moved up to 6. A teacher is included in that circle, and there are about 5 to 7 learners in that circle with that teacher. And each teacher specializes in a language method. And so the language methods that I'm referring to are methods like ASLA, one of my favorites. It's Accelerated Second Language Acquisitioning, developed by Dr. Gray Morning. And then there's task-based learning. Then there's TPR with storytelling. Then there's direct method. Then we have like Suggestopedia method. And then we have memory games. So those are just some samples. There's at least a dozen methods that we all employ. Learners will go through each circle after they've been assessed and grouped. And they'll move through those circles 3 times a day. So the learning is very rigorous, it's very fast, it's very compact. It's like boot camp, but for your language. And the classes are small because study says that this is the way to go. Keep your classes small. And so we have room to do that. And so they'll go through these mini stations, and they're either 20 to 40 minutes long. And everybody just keeps rotating through. And so you're hearing the language from all these different speakers in a variety of ways. When learning to reclaim your language, you need to hear the language 20 times over in 20 different ways from 20 different, not 20 speakers, but from multiple speakers. And so that's what my friend Peter Turner was referring to. And all these words and these ways of saying things are mingling in your mind when you're going to sleep. While the adults are learning, a lot of these adults will bring their families. And they come from all over Canada. Families are coming to learn how to speak Cree with their families. And so we have a children's camp that happens while these language learning stations are happening. So there's a language teacher for the children. And we're busy from approximately 10 o'clock till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We're in boot camp for language. And I timed it last year, and I, for instance, was in the language for 7 hours a day. That took us a long time to get there, but we're there, and we know how to do it. 7 hours a day for 1 week. And I'm looking at new research now that language camps work as long as people are, studying the language before they come. So for the structure of the language camp, there's a little bit of housekeeping that goes within that. So we have security, not just for wild animals, but sometimes we get some crazy people coming. I'm just kidding, but sometimes that does happen. So we have security that happens. The way we do food is also calculated. We get different groups of people to bring certain types of food, so food is not wasted when you come to Cree Camp, and everybody takes a turn cooking for the group. So we rent a kitchen. We're allowed to sleep anywhere within the vicinity of this place. We rent porta potties. We do have a place to go and shower, which is like the local school or band hall. And they do assessments before they come. People register online. Today's registration, or this year's registration, is April 17th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we fill out fast. So this summer we have room for 50 to 80 people. Last year our camp sold out in 3 minutes. So, and people come from, again, like I said, all over Canada. I'm going to come back to our study. So this is the question that we asked ourselves because we were the participants. We asked the teachers and the learners, what are the experiences of adult participants in the land-based Cree Camp? We used Indigenous research methodology because it blurs the line of researcher participants and lets us co-learn. It's based on the circle model. We looked at our roles and then the data. As both co-researchers and study participants, our team used 4 sharing circles to explore the language camps as a language revitalization strategy. We met 4 times throughout the year, all over Treaty 6. So we met here in Edmonton one time, we met in Saskatoon one time, we met in Regina one time, and then of course in Sturgeon Lake. We transcribed our transcriptions. Every time we met, we recorded what we were saying and transcribed them, and then we looked for the main themes. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to say. With Cree Camp, we have a theme a year. Every year, there's a different theme. And all the teachers have to make their lesson plans match that theme. So last year, our theme was Giyogeitan. And so everything that went with that, visiting. And then the year before that, it had something to do with being safe, our mental well-being because of COVID. And then the year before that, I think it had to do with kinship. So every year is a different theme, and we're learning that language over and over for a week. And so we looked at the main themes of what people were saying in our research. And so these are some of the things that came out of our research, what people were saying. So we talked about spirituality and relationship building in our research. Our research is spiritual in nature. We understand ourselves as spiritual beings having a physical experience, and we conduct ourselves accordingly. A lot of the things that we do at Cree Camp just come naturally to us. The values just come naturally to us. The way we operate just comes naturally from being and thinking imamtanetaman uma nēhiyawak. So there's no reason to explain anything. Doing this research, we lived together, we socialized together, we visited. We kind of just naturally, informally adopted each other as brother and sister through language camps. What we've been doing since 2017, Gagi Samawin, Gagi Simutan, Gagi Simawawak. We pray together every Monday. Since 2017, we have this time, 8 p.m. Saskatchewan time. Doesn't matter where we are because we all don't live in the same vicinity. I live in Victoria. Dorothy lives in Edmonton. My brother Bill lives in Brandon, Manitoba. My other brother Randy lives in Saskatoon. Peter lives in Regina. So, and then we invite everybody who comes to Cree Camp to pray with us Monday, 8 o'clock, simultaneously, and we hold a prayer for 8 minutes. And what we pray for and what we pray to is the language spirit to flourish within our homes and within each other. Since we started doing that, we've been becoming more and more loving. We're able to do our work easier because of this prayer. And we pray for each other and each other's families. And so that's what had come out of this research and being at camp together. And so when doing our research, we also looked at literature to help us figure out where we wanted to go, what we were saying, and what we wanted to do. There's not a lot of literature out there when it comes to adult language learning from a land-based perspective. So what we're doing is we're also regenerating knowledge in the form of literature. This is some of the literature that we looked at. We looked at community-based approaches to adult language revitalization. We looked at the Master Apprentice program. We looked at the Language House program. And then, of course, the language camps. There's not a lot of people doing that. And then we looked at Indigenous languages and the land. A lot of the work that we follow is Leanne Simpson's work. And then we looked at Indigenous languages and the connection to well-being and to wellness and to healing, which was very, very helpful. So we learned at language camps, not only are we reclaiming language and our identity, and identity and worldview are the same thing. When people talk about those things, they mean the same thing. We also realized that we were healing, that I was healing. The majority of us are healing when we're coming together in reclaiming language. This is the literature that guided our work. And so then we had this interdialogue between themes. So here's some pictures of us coding. We learned how to code. Each and every one of these people work in mainstream education, but at the same time, they have a connection to their home community, which is really important to us. So some of the themes that were coming out of our conversation and after coding were things like the soul or the spirit, the Cree spirit is sustained by the earth, which is sustained by the language of the earth. It speaks to you. This is how our data unfolds. There's no separation between themes, but an interrelatedness and an interdialogue. It's very holistic when we looked at it, like, you know, from the big picture. So some of our other findings were things like Cree Camp serves as a path towards greater cultural connectedness. It's a therapeutic process. The process includes kinship, coming together as nēhiyawak, being together with the land, coming home, being able to talk about our suppressed feelings. Spirit, land, language, and the nēhiyaw way of thinking. All of those things were repetitive when we looked at our data. And so when we talked about the spirit, achak, everybody said something like, there's something spiritual going on. Maybe there's a spirit. I wouldn't deny there's spiritual things going on at Cree Camp. There is something that happens. I don't know what it happens, but something happens. I want to call it energy. Maybe that's what it is. Someone said, I feel like it's a broken spirit. Something is missing. Part of that spirit in this living language. Randy says, I always think back to the honor, the integrity, the pride, the respect that our people have with each other, the land, and the spirit world. And then Andrea says, and I would say that it's a sort of healing to be around laughter. I think there's something spiritual that goes on there. That's not my place to talk about that, but I think there's something spiritual too. So these are what the participants are saying about Cree Camp. So we're being our own, researchers, analyzing ourselves, and then sharing this information. Nimis Randy says the land misses the language. This is us at Cree Camp. Then we talk about nēhiyawak. My brother Peter, he never grew up in the language, although he's a nēhiyaw. When he first came, he had a really hard time distinguishing when Cree words started and when they ended. Like he couldn't speak. This is what he says. Now, because I've had so much ear listening experience, listening to the people speak, I can pick up the pauses between the words, and that's really beneficial behind having so many different instructors. So listening is something often overlooked when we have, bilingual education or when we're teaching Cree classes. We don't take the time to listen and to develop our ears. A nēhiyaw consciousization. So we're looking into the Cree mind, the Cree way of thinking and being. And again, Randy says, I think about our ancestors, Mother Earth, grandfathers, grandmothers, out there in the spiritual realms. I think back to ceremonies. We are a praying people. Like elders, they would pray with such sincerity, Gagi Samawin. And it is for unselfishness, altruism, right? They're not doing it for themselves, but for the benefit of all. And so this is one of my motivations for running these camps. I'm doing it for the benefit of everyone else. I'm doing it for the benefit of like this, what Levi was saying earlier this morning, like a safe space and a place to come and heal and learn how to bibikskwin. So some of our concluding thoughts were things like, immersion is important for learners to advance their comprehension and comfort. This is also a place to practice, so we don't have and talk like that book Cree. So I don't sound like a white woman speaking Cree. Learning language is a choice, takes effort, and requires opportunity. And this place is an opportunity. Everyone at camp enhances their nēhiyaw way of being. There is energy at camp that nurtures our spirit. As a collective, we're deliberately practicing and doing the radical resurgence of reclaiming language through land-based camps. And again, this is not something new or cutting edge. It's something that our ancestors have always done. We have a second piece of research coming out of this, which I hope will be coming out by Christmas time. So there's a second piece to that. So with this website, it's brand new. We wanted to point out that language, land, and identity is what creates nationhood. And so each little tab by language, it gives kind of like a definition of it. And then we have land, and it gives like a kind of like a definition to what I'm referring to, and then identity. This is another project that I'm working on with Randy Morin and Christy Belcourt. This is a book that will be coming out in the summertime. It's now end of March. So by July, this book should be ready. And this book is going to get learners, participants ready for Cree Camp. There's a pile of phrases that learners should know before they come to camp. So this is kind of like a prepping opportunity. So if you press play, you can hear me as a second language learner speaking.
Questions your teacher might ask. Responses you might say. Mate atsiaw, nēhiyawak, ahauti. Do you understand? Kinistotin? Do you plural understand? Kinistotina awau? Yes, I understand. Aha, ninistotin. Yes, I understand, but I can't remember the word. Aha, ninistotin. Maga moy. Nigi kiskisin. Anima. Itwewenis.
That's kind of inspired from the late Dr. Frida Henneque's work. I had the opportunity of meeting and sitting down with her in my early 20s when I first started my BEd program. And so that's where the inspiration comes from. Here on this site, I'll have like upcoming workshops. Right now, Dorothy and I are facilitating a class online. We're halfway done. We have about another 5 more weeks to go. Again, this is all online. And then I do have a registration for the annual summer camp available April 17th, which will take place in Sturgeon Lake. So these are things that the nēhiyawak language experience and the teachers that I work with, these are things that we've done or things that are coming up. Obviously, our book launch was one of them with my little sister, Andrea Custer, in developing this book. This book, again, was inspired by having families of our own and sitting around the kitchen table. That's where that came from. The inspiration came from our own children, the motherhood domain, speaking language in the home, connecting to that role. My children asked me like 2 or 3 big, deep questions when they were little. One of them was, like, Nigawi, where do I come from? I know I come from your belly, but no, really, where do we come from? Nēhiyawak, where do we come from? We know that the Catholics and the Christians have the Adam and Eve story. settlers have the Big Bang theory, but where do we come from? And so that was a big question that inspired the book. The other question was, so nēhiyaw, if we were so powerful, what happened to us? What happened to us if we were this great Plains Cree nation? How did we lose so much? And why are we like the poorest of the poor in our own land? That was another deep question. And the other question was, they wanted to know this idea of like identity. What does it mean to be nēhiyaw? Like, what is my identity? And so the only way that I could connect to that is through my Nokampan and her stories and the land-based stories she shared with me when we were together. She pointed out places and place names, which really enhanced my own identity. So that's also in that book. And then we talk about decolonization, and then we go into mini lesson plans. So those questions were some of the guiding work. And so this is where we come up with the creation story and input that in there. How did we lose so much? We do a quick skit of colonization, how we lost so much. In everyday terminology, because we wanted this book to be for families, for children, like my children and like Andrea's children who asked those hard questions. So here we have some just past pictures of Cree Camp. We've had like many different participants come to camp. Kevin Lewis was one of our teachers with his mom back in the day. So I have lots of pictures from over the years and video footage. And I was able to use a lot of that knowledge in my dissertation. So it talks about the experience. This is a one of a kind of experience that focuses on language skills and vocabulary buildup. It's groundbreaking work. It's been in existence for 18 years. This summer will be our 19th year. It's a not-for-profit organization, which means that we have people who write grants, and this is what sustains us. There's a little bit of information there about the camp and how the camp is operated from a nēhiyaw way of knowing and being and doing. We recently started having people have the opportunity to participate in matutsan ceremonies because, again, like I said, language reclamation can be sometimes traumatic for people. That's open to people. And also just being on the land. As you heard from Dr. Jessie Sylvester, that land is healing. And we pick the berries and we harvest the plants and the medicines that grow. And we have a really rich area of medicine within our community of Sturgeon Lake. So things, what to expect. You'll have an increased ability to speak and understand Cree over a short period of time. Your vocabulary will be enhanced and strengthened. You'll be able to understand the meaning behind the words. And you'll be able to connect to land and learn from this idea of place. Oh, here's our team. Darian Adjicate is a new member. And Cynthia Job is our children's teacher at camp. Randy Morin has been with me for a long time. My uncle Joseph Netelhau, he's our kite for the camp. Of course, we have Andrea Custer and Solomon Ratt. There is an application form. We do have supporters who contribute to the camp. Our biggest supporter is Amuskasis. This is the Semagnis worm family in Saskatoon. Their whole family comes, and they've been coming for the last 5 years. Their whole family comes, and now they have a new grandbaby. So these are the kinds of families that were inspiring. We have another family that comes all the way from Toronto, our Tripachawis' family. And then we have the Goulet family, Danis Goulet. She brings her family, and Kona. Her dad also comes too. Keith Goulet. And then, of course, we have Affinity Credit Union. They're also a big supporter, and the Foundation's Learning and Skills, which used to be Read Saskatoon. Last thing, there's a free download, the nēhiyawak Language Experience Immersion Camp Guide. Again, my team with Dorothy and Randy and Bill, we all worked on this guide, how to create and make your own camp. And it's online and it's for free. So we give you everything that we know, because we want other communities to do this work. This work is my lifelong work. It's been my most compelling purpose to my existence as a nēhiyaw. I'm very proud of this work. And again, I do believe that my ancestors, my past loved ones, they come to me in my dreams and, applaud me and tell me to keep doing the work that I'm doing. And it makes me happy. So I continue to do this kind of work with my job now at the University of Victoria. Like I said, I work in the Indigenous language revitalization field, and I'm a part of many different projects. Right now I'm looking into research about, eliminating English in our immersion settings. How do we do that? How do I get the teachers and the participants to stop using English? And then how do we use the language to help us in the language? I just came from a big talk in Portland. It was for the AAAL, and that is as white and nēhiyawak as you get in language work. And so I'm the only nēhiyaw in the building in a place just like this, and I'm talking about stop using and teaching English to TESOL teachers, to teachers who teach English. And I'm just like, we gotta stop doing this because it's killing the minority Indigenous languages within the area of those programs on those lands. And you wanna talk about decolonization? To me, decolonization means giving back the land. So you can't use that sentence, that whole phrase together, decolonizing TESOL. I'm like, what does that mean? Because to me, as an Indigenous person, giving our land back is what that means, not teaching more English. And so it was very courageous to get up there and to say that, but I did it for us. Hi, hi. Gnas kumtanoa.